Good evening, Coral Springs. Good evening. I am your Vice Mayor, Nancy Metayer Bowen, but before I begin my remarks, I would like to acknowledge my parents who are in the audience this evening, Miss Lynn and Marley Metayer. I am the leader that I am today because they instilled some amazing core values to me and my brothers and sister. So thank you, Mommy and Daddy. Love you.
He allegedly killed his wife, left her upstairs, and then went to sleep. That is the part people have not been able to shake since this case began. Because this was not some faceless headline. This was Nancy Metayer Bowen, the Vice Mayor of Coral Springs, 38 years old, a rising public figure, a woman with a future already taking shape in front of her. And according to investigators, on the night of March 31st, 2026, that future ended inside her own home. Then came the detail that made this case hit even harder. By the next morning, while people at City Hall were wondering why Nancy was not answering her phone, police say her husband was already gone. Gone from the house, gone before officers arrived, gone while Nancy was still there. And when police walked into that bedroom on April 1st, what they found was not the kind of scene this city was prepared for. Not for a vice mayor, not for a woman so many people believed was only moving upward, not for someone who was supposed to be stepping into one of the biggest moments of her life. That is what makes this story so hard to look away from, because the question is not just how Nancy Metayer Bowen died, it is why the man closest to her allegedly became the one who ended her life. What was happening inside that marriage? What did he think he could not take anymore? And how did a woman on the edge of something bigger end up becoming the center of one of the most disturbing cases in Florida politics? This story begins with a husband, a bedroom, and a silence that told everyone around Nancy that something was terribly wrong. Coral Springs, Florida, is not the kind of place most people expect to see at the center of a case like this. It is a Broward County city of roughly 135,000 people, clean streets, neighborhood meetings, school traffic in the mornings. The kind of city where people still notice who serves on the commission, because those people are not distant names on television. They are local, reachable, familiar. In a place like Coral Springs, local government does not feel abstract. It feels personal. And that is part of why Nancy Metayer Bowen mattered so much here. She was not just a public official with a title beside her name. She was the kind of leader residents felt they could actually know. The kind of person people believed would answer, call back, show up, and keep showing up. Nancy was 38 years old. She became the first Black and Haitian American woman ever elected to the Coral Springs City Commission. She won that seat in 2020. Then, in 2024, she was re-elected without opposition. No challenger, no serious push against her. No sign that the city wanted anyone else in that seat. And in 2025, her fellow commissioners selected her to serve as vice mayor. That matters, because positions like that are not handed out on image alone. They go to people other officials trust to carry the city with them. Nancy had built that trust, and she had built it carefully. She held a master's degree in environmental health sciences from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She had interned under Barack Obama. She had also worked under former United States Senator Bill Nelson. Later, she served as Florida Caribbean Vote Director for both the Biden campaign and the Harris 2024 presidential campaign. In South Florida political circles, Nancy was not seen as someone still trying to break through. She already had. People knew her name. People watched where she was headed. But what makes her story hit harder is that the people who knew her did not speak about her like a resume. They spoke about her like a person they genuinely loved being around. That is a very different thing. Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who knew Nancy, did not start by listing her credentials when he spoke after her death. He called her one of the nicest people he had ever worked with. That tells you something. It tells you the warmth came first. The titles came after. The achievement was real, but so was the kindness. And there is another part of Nancy's life that matters here, because it changes the way you understand her final months. By early 2026, she was carrying a level of grief most people would struggle just to stand under. In December 2025, her younger brother Joshua died by suicide at 26 years old, after a long battle with schizophrenia. Joshua was also a survivor of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School shooting on February 14, 2018. Nancy had buried her brother less than 4 months before she was killed. Less than 4 months. And still, she kept moving. Still, she kept working. Still, she kept showing up in public while carrying something heavy in private. That detail matters because it says something essential about who she was. Nancy was not coasting through life when she died. She was pushing through pain, holding herself together, trying to keep building, even after loss had already entered her family in a way that never really leaves. And before we get to what she was planning for Thursday, April 3rd, 2026, before we get to the next chapter she was preparing to step into, we need to go back to the night of March 31st. Because that is where this story truly turns. Stephen Bowen was 40 years old. He was Nancy Metayer Bowen's husband. They had married in 2022, and from the outside he looked like the kind of man people rarely question at first. He was a licensed radiology technician. He held a leadership role as Chief Operating Officer of Men of St. Luke, a faith-based nonprofit built around Christian fellowship and mentorship for men. His public image was clean, structured, respectable. He posted scripture. He presented himself as grounded in faith. He posted anniversary photos with Nancy that fit the image people expect when they look at a marriage from the outside and want to believe everything inside it is steady, purpose, belief, family. That was the picture. And for a long time, that picture appears to have been enough for the outside world. But cases like this force people to go back and look again, to read old details with different eyes, to notice the thing that did not seem urgent at the time, but feels heavier later. One of those details was sitting in plain view. On the day Nancy's body was found, Stephen Bowen's Instagram bio reportedly contained just 3 words: God, husband, armed. Not a sentence, not a joke. Not buried in some long caption people could overlook. 3 words placed side by side like a personal summary. His account also included multiple images of him posing with firearms. Now, by itself, that does not prove violence. It does not explain murder, and it would be irresponsible to pretend otherwise. But in a case where a wife ends up dead inside her own home, details like that stop feeling casual. They start feeling like something you hold on to, something you file away, something that may not mean everything, but no longer means nothing. What we do not have, at least not publicly, is a full window into what life inside that marriage actually looked like day to day. We do not know every argument. We do not know every silence. We do not know what tension may have been building behind closed doors, or how long it had been there. That is where people often rush in and start filling the gaps with assumptions. But the stronger ground is the evidence. And the evidence, as laid out by investigators, points away from a sudden, passing burst of rage and towards something far more deliberate. That distinction matters, because it changes the way this story is heard. It changes the way Stephen Bowen is seen. And it changes the question from what happened to what he chose to do next. At some point on the night of Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, Stephen Bowen crossed a line he could never step back from. And the part that stays with people, the part that keeps this case lodged in the mind, is not only what detectives say happened to Nancy, it is what they say happened immediately after. But to understand why that detail hit so hard, we need to go to the morning she was found. Because the way Nancy Metayer Bowen was discovered says something deeply troubling about the hours between her death and the moment police walked through that door. It started with something small enough to be explained away. Nancy Metayer Bowen did not show up to work on the morning of Wednesday, April 1st, 2026. At first, that is not the kind of thing people panic over. People run late, phones die, schedules shift. A meeting gets missed and then made up. But this did not feel like that. Nancy had city meetings that morning. Her colleagues expected her there, and the people who knew her best understood almost immediately that this was not normal. Because Nancy was not careless with responsibility. She was not someone who simply disappeared from her day without warning, not from work, not from public commitments, not from a life she took seriously. And especially not after everything she had already been carrying in the months before. This was a woman who had kept showing up even after burying her younger brother. A woman who kept moving through grief because people depended on her. So when Wednesday morning came and Nancy was suddenly unreachable, the silence did not feel random. It felt wrong. City employees began trying to contact her. Call after call. No answer. No text back. No explanation. At some point, one city official reached out to Stephen Bowen, Nancy's husband. And according to investigators, whatever came back in that exchange, whatever he said or failed to say, was troubling enough that they did not keep waiting for clarity. They called police. That decision matters because it tells you this was not treated like a minor delay for very long. By approximately 10:04 a.m., Coral Springs police officers arrived at the home on the 800 block of Northwest 127th Avenue. A welfare check. That is how it started on paper. Routine in purpose, ordinary in wording. The kind of call officers handle without expecting it to become the center of a state headline. They were going there to check on a woman who had gone quiet. That was all. Then they entered the house. Then they went upstairs. Then they reached the master bedroom. And everything changed. Inside that room, officers found Nancy Metayer Bowen dead. She was 38 years old, vice mayor of Coral Springs, wrapped in blankets, sealed inside black garbage bags, hidden in the bedroom of the home she shared with her husband. That is the moment this case stopped being local concern and became something much harder to process. Because now, this was not a missing official, not a medical emergency, not a misunderstanding. This was a homicide scene inside the home of a sitting vice mayor. And according to the Coral Springs Police probable cause affidavit, the evidence pointed back to the night before, Tuesday, March 31st, 2026. Investigators believed Nancy had been killed hours earlier. The affidavit described a shotgun wound. Spent shotgun shells were reportedly found near her body. A forensic examination identified a gunshot wound to her shoulder, and the condition of the scene suggested two things at once: violence and an effort to conceal what had been done. That combination is what makes the discovery so difficult to sit with. Not only that Nancy was killed, but that after the violence, there appears to have been time. Time to move, time to cover, time for someone in that house to make choices after her life was already over. For Coral Springs, April 1st did not begin as a day of crisis. It began like any other Wednesday. People went to work, schedules were moving, phones were ringing. And then, almost without warning, the city was forced to absorb something it had never had to absorb before. Its vice mayor had been found dead in her own home. A public servant people knew by name, a woman residents had trusted, a life that had felt. Visible, active, and still rising, suddenly reduced to a crime scene upstairs behind a closed bedroom door. And as investigators were processing that scene, the man they would soon charge with killing her was no longer there. Stephen Bowen was already gone. And that is where this case takes on a different shape. Because what he allegedly did after Nancy was killed says a great deal about what he knew, when he knew it, and how this stopped looking like panic and started looking like something else entirely. By the time police entered the house on Northwest 127th Avenue that morning, Stephen Bowen was no longer there. Nancy was upstairs, dead, and the man detectives would soon accuse of killing her had already left the scene. That matters, Because flight does not answer every question in a case like this, but it changes the temperature immediately. It tells investigators they are not dealing with a man waiting beside a tragedy he says he cannot explain. They are dealing with a man who moved, a man who left, a man who, according to the timeline that began forming that morning, already knew exactly what police would find once they reached that bedroom. Law enforcement moved quickly. Surveillance was activated across Broward County. An alert went out, and the search did not stay open for long. Technology narrowed the gap fast. License plate readers in Plantation picked up Stephen Bowen's pickup truck along State Road 7, US 441. That is one of those cold details that says a lot without saying much at all. He had not vanished. He had not crossed state lines. He had not even made it out of the county. Whatever plan he thought he had, the window was already closing. Authorities tracked the vehicle to Landmark Towers, an apartment complex in Plantation. Then the response sharpened. The Broward Sheriff's Office moved in with assistance from Fort Lauderdale Police and Plantation Police. Cell phone footage from the scene, video that later spread online, showed officers swarming the complex with weapons drawn. You can feel the urgency in images like that. Not chaos, urgency. The kind that tells you law enforcement believed they were closing in on a man tied to something very serious and very recent. Stephen Bowen was taken into custody without further incident. No standoff, no public explanation. Just the end of a short flight that had already made the case look worse. But the detail that changes the shape of this story is not only where he went, it is who he went to. According to investigators, Stephen Bowen went to a friend's apartment. And what that friend later told detectives, what Bowen had allegedly said before police ever got there, becomes one of the most disturbing turns in the entire case. Because now this is no longer just about a missing husband found across town. Now it is about what he may have been carrying with him, what he may have already admitted, and how much of the night before he may have been trying to manage before law enforcement closed in. Before I tell you exactly what detectives say Bowen confessed to, and before we get to the words investigators say came out of his mouth, you need to understand one thing about the timeline of March 31st into April 1st. Because the detail prosecutors are likely to lean on hardest is not just that Nancy was killed, it is what Stephen Bowen allegedly did after the killing. And once you hear that sequence in full, the case stops feeling like a burst of violence and starts feeling like something far harder to explain away. According to the probable cause affidavit, and according to what a witness later told detectives, the violence happened on the night of Tuesday, March 31st, 2026. Inside the home Nancy Metayer Bowen shared with her husband. Inside the bedroom they shared. Investigators say Stephen Bowen shot his wife 3 times with a shotgun. 3 times. Not once in panic. Not once in confusion. 3 times. And when you let that settle for a second, the room itself starts to feel different. A bedroom is supposed to be the last ordinary place in a day, the place where the noise stops, the place where a person is safest. For Nancy, detectives say, that room became the place where her life ended. And then comes the detail that people have repeated over and over since this case broke, because it is the detail that feels almost impossible to absorb. According to investigators, after Nancy was shot, Stephen Bowen went downstairs and slept. He slept in the same house, with her body still upstairs, with the silence of what he had allegedly done still hanging over those rooms. He slept. That one detail changes the emotional weight of everything. Because now this is not just about violence. It is about what came after the violence. The pause after it. The stillness after it. The fact that hours passed in that house with Nancy dead upstairs while the man detectives say killed her remained under the same roof. Then morning came, Wednesday, April 1st. The same morning her coworkers were trying to reach her. The same morning City Hall was starting to realize something was wrong. And according to investigators, that was when Stephen Bowen left the house and went to a friend's apartment. But he did not arrive empty-handed. Detectives say he allegedly tried to get that friend to hold onto a bag, and inside that bag, investigators believe, was the shotgun used to kill Nancy. That matters for a reason beyond shock. Because once you move from the shooting itself to the alleged effort to move the weapon, the case begins to look less like something uncontrolled and more like something followed by decision after decision. And then came the moment investigators say stripped the whole thing down to 4 words. After Bowen was taken into custody, detectives asked him why he had killed his wife. Face to face, no crowd, no social media, no public statement polished for sympathy. Just a direct question in custody. And according to the affidavit, he gave a direct answer. 4 words. He could not take it anymore. That was it. No fuller explanation made public, no specific grievance, no detail that named what he meant, no context that clarified anything for the people trying to understand why Nancy Metayer Bowen was dead. Just 4 words and silence. No remorse recorded, no real explanation, no name, no reason. Just 4 words and a blank space where the answer should have been. And from this point forward, it matters to be careful. Everything tied to motive has to be separated cleanly. What comes from official court documents is one thing. What comes from public speculation is another. What people believe happened is not automatically what can be proved. That distinction matters in a case like this because once those 4 words became public, the theories started immediately. People began filling in the silence for him, trying to decide what he meant, trying to decide what Nancy may have known, trying to decide what was happening inside that marriage before the shooting. And that is where this story becomes even more complicated. Because he could not take it anymore sounds like an explanation at first, but it is not. Not really. It is a phrase that feels personal while saying almost nothing. It tells you he wanted to frame himself as someone at a breaking point. It does not tell you what that breaking point actually was. And if you are going to understand why this allegedly happened, or at least why so many people think it happened, you have to sit with that phrase very carefully. What it could mean, what it does not prove, and why that silence around motive has kept this case burning in the public mind ever since. I want to be very careful here, because this is the point in a case like this where people stop reporting and start filling in blanks. In the days after Stephen Bowen was arrested, a rumor began moving fast through comment sections, local discussion spaces, and online posts. The claim was that he killed Nancy Metayer Bowen because he believed she was cheating on him, that an alleged affair was the reason, that this was jealousy, that this was rage over betrayal. A lot of people heard that version early. A lot of people repeated it. And I need to say this as clearly as possible. As of April 13, 2026, that claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been stated as fact in the probable cause affidavit. It has not been listed in any charge. Prosecutors have not publicly identified it as the motive. No, court document made public has established that Nancy was involved in an affair, and no official source has confirmed that alleged infidelity is why Stephen Bowen killed her. So I am not going to present that rumor as truth. I am telling you it exists because many people following this case have already seen it, heard it, or repeated it. But there is a difference between what circulates and what has been proved. And in a case this painful, that difference matters. What we do have is the statement investigators say Bowen gave after his arrest. He could not take it anymore. That is the phrase sitting at the center of this story. And the reason it has pulled so much speculation into it is because it sounds like an explanation without actually being one. It does not tell us what he could not take. It does not identify an argument. It does not point to a specific event. It does not name a grievance. It does not even tell us whether he was talking about something real, something imagined, or something only he understood in that moment. It is a sentence that feels loaded and empty at the same time. And that is exactly why so many theories rushed in to fill the silence around it. But there is another reason this case has landed so hard with people, and it goes beyond rumor. It forces a truth into the open that many people would rather keep at a distance. We tell ourselves that intimate partner violence has warning signs visible from the outside, that status protects people, that education protects people, that visibility protects people, that if someone is accomplished enough, respected enough, publicly connected enough, the danger will somehow look obvious before it becomes deadly. Nancy Metayer Bowen destroys that illusion. She was a vice mayor, a Johns Hopkins graduate, a rising political figure in South Florida, and none of that protected her inside her own home. That is the hardest truth in this case. Public success did not equal private safety. And what makes all of this even more painful is the timing. Because while the public was just beginning to learn Nancy's name in the worst possible way, she had already been planning to step into one of the biggest moments of her life. Thursday, April 3rd, 2026, was supposed to mean something very different for her. And once you hear what she was preparing to announce, this case stops feeling like only a murder story and starts feeling like the cutting off of a future that was already in motion. Thursday, April 3rd, 2026, was supposed to be a beginning, not a vigil, not mourning, not headlines about a homicide. A beginning. Multiple public officials and people close to Nancy Metayer Bowen have said that was the day she planned to formally announce her candidacy for Florida's 20th congressional district. She had the date, she had the plan, she had already shared it with people around her. That matters, because it changes the emotional weight of everything that came before. Nancy was not drifting through the final days of her life. She was preparing for a larger one. She was standing at the edge of a political leap, the kind of move that tells you a person still sees tomorrow clearly, still sees purpose, still sees room ahead. And the truth is that future was not being imagined from a place of ease. It was being built while she was carrying real grief. Congressman Jared Moskowitz said publicly that he had been with Nancy just 4 days before her death. And in speaking about her afterward, he pointed to something that makes this loss feel even heavier. Nancy had recently buried her younger brother, Joshua Metayer. Joshua was 26 years old. He died by suicide in December 2025 after a long struggle with schizophrenia. He was also a survivor of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting on February 14, 2018. He survived that day, but not everything that came after it. So when people talk about Nancy's final weeks, they are talking about a woman who was not only working, leading, and planning. They are talking about a woman who was grieving her brother and still moving forward anyway. Still showing up, still carrying herself into rooms where people needed her. Still preparing to step into something bigger while carrying something painful. That says more about Nancy than a long list of achievements ever could. Because resumes tell you what a person accomplished. Moments like this tell you who they were while life was pressing down on them. And that is what makes the timing of her death so devastating. On the night of Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, Nancy was still a woman with a plan. Still a woman with a date on the calendar. Still a woman with a Thursday waiting for her. She did not know that the announcement she was preparing to make would never come. That the campaign she was about to launch would stop before it began. That the next chapter she had already started reaching for would be cut off inside her own home. The announcement was ready. The campaign was coming. The seat was within reach. And then it was gone. And she was gone. And Thursday became something else entirely. By Thursday, April 2nd, 2026, the case had already moved from a private horror to a public prosecution. Stephen Bowen was formally charged with premeditated first-degree murder and tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. He appeared before Broward County Judge Corey B. Friedman. The judge found probable cause on both charges. Bond was denied on the murder count, and Bowen was remanded to the Broward County Main Jail, where he remained held without bond as of the date of this story. No trial date had been set. No publicly named defense attorney had stepped forward. On paper, those are procedural steps, necessary, expected. But in a case like this, they also mark the moment when shock begins turning into record, when grief starts getting translated into charges, hearings, affidavits, and court dates. And outside the courtroom, the reaction was immediate. Not only in Coral Springs, but across Florida. Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried said she had hugged Nancy just 2 weeks earlier at the party's leadership summit. Coral Springs Commissioner Joshua Simmons called her his battle buddy and said the commission was now incomplete without her. State Representative Angie Nixon, Broward County Mayor Mark Bogan, Tamarack Vice Mayor Marlon Bolton, and others across the political world issued statements of grief and disbelief. A vigil formed outside Coral Springs City Hall, and that image says a lot.
Through grief and tears, friends of Nancy Metayer Bowen shined a light on her legacy. They say it's one of compassion, exemplified by the number of people who showed up tonight.
It means a lot. It means to show you who Nancy was to so many of us.
The Metayer family had a front row seat to the outpouring of love, which came with a flood of emotion.
Grieve how you gotta grieve.
Her family has been dealing with this pain for days.
A city gathering outside the building where Nancy had worked, served, and helped lead. People standing together in the place where her voice had once carried authority, now standing there because that voice was gone.
Good evening, Coral Springs. I am your Vice Mayor, Nancy Metayer Bowen, but before I begin my remarks, I would like to acknowledge my parents who are in the audience this evening, Miss Lynn and Marley Metayer. I am the leader that I am today because they instilled some amazing core values to me and my brothers and sister. So thank you, Mommy and Daddy. Love you.
Law enforcement also used this moment to say something that often gets buried once the headlines move on. Intimate partner violence does not sort its victims by education, by status, by profession, or by public standing. It does not spare people because they are accomplished. It does not spare people because they are visible. Coral Springs Police Chief Brad Mock confirmed there were no additional suspects and no ongoing threat to the public. But the deeper threat, the one this case forces into view, was never about a stranger on the loose. It was about what can happen behind a closed door, inside a home, inside a marriage, while the outside world still sees a couple and assumes safety. And that brings us back to the hardest truth in this entire case. Nancy Metayer Bowen had broken barriers. She had built trust. She had survived grief. She had kept moving. And the place she was least protected, the place none of her titles, education, public respect, or political momentum could shield her, was her own bedroom. That is the detail this story keeps returning to. Not just that she was killed, but where, and by whom. And there is one more detail that lingers with a kind of cold clarity. Stephen. Bowen's public Instagram bio reportedly said 3 words: God, husband, armed. In that order. All 3 words mattered to how he presented himself. And in the end, it was the third one that investigators say turned a private space into a crime scene and ended Nancy Metayer Bowen's life. As of April 13, 2026, Stephen Bowen remains in the Broward County Main Jail awaiting trial. Nancy Metayer Bowen is gone. She was 38 years old, an environmental scientist, a Johns Hopkins graduate, vice mayor of Coral Springs, the first Black and Haitian American woman ever elected to the city commission, a woman who was preparing to take another step forward. And now that step belongs to history instead of her. The April 3rd announcement never happened. The campaign never launched. The future she was reaching for was cut off before she could even say it out loud. Someone else will stand where she was supposed to stand. Someone else will take the seat she was moving toward. But the path Nancy built to get there still matters. And so does the life behind the title. The city of Coral Springs has created a webpage in her name with updates on the investigation. Her city has not forgotten her, and neither should we. Because what stays with me in this case is not only the violence, it is the contradiction. Nancy had public respect, public visibility, public purpose. She had colleagues, influence, momentum, and a future people could clearly see. And still, none of that protected her in the one place where protection mattered most. Inside her own home. Inside her own marriage. How do we build a world where a woman can be that visible in public and still be that vulnerable in private? How do we close that gap? I do not think this case gives an easy answer. I think it leaves us with the kind of question that hurts because it stays true after the headlines fade. And if this case moves, if a trial date is set, if court documents reveal more, if the motive becomes clearer, I will cover that update here. So, subscribe if you want to stay with this case as it unfolds. And if Nancy Metayer Bowen's story stayed with you, share this video with someone else. She deserved to be introducing a campaign. The least we can do now is make sure her name is still heard.